Rachel, thank you for joining us. So Rachel Becker, she is actually the Senior Director of Programs over at Cancer and Careers. And we are so honored that we just newly started a relationship with them where we can bring valuable resources. You know, ladies, when you received your care box in the mail to springboard your program, right? Or when you're at our wellness day to springboard this program, this wellness integrative care program, we are now going to have information in your care box, in your wellness program, all about navigating your career during a cancer diagnosis. And we know Rachel is actually a licensed social worker, has been speaking all over the country on this topic, and has really allowed us to, you know, utilize this incredible foundation to, you know, bring it front and center for our community. Unite for Her, Rachel, we've treated over 7,000 women. So it's incredibly valuable for us to be able to have you as a partner to share all of the resources and the knowledge that you have. We all know balancing work and cancer, it's difficult, you know, and there's a lot of complexities, there's a lot of challenges. Add COVID on top of that, managing side effects. I saw in the chat someone was switching jobs, trying to understand how to get time off if you're struggling through your cancer diagnosis. Like what are you entitled to? What do you want to share? There's a lot. So Rachel, we are honored to have you here tonight. Thank you. I will monitor the chat. If we can ask everyone to please mute yourselves, and then, you know, utilize the chat. I will watch that and then just sort of interrupt at a timely place and see if we can get some questions and going for our group. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. And again, thank you so much, Sue, for having me here tonight. We are equally thrilled to be partnered with you guys and so excited about the amazing work that we're doing and just thrilled to see so many people tuning in tonight to talk about this topic. So I'm going to give a quick look at the chat and see if anyone, about the along the way. So I have a sense if you want to again. Okay, so I'm seeing some currently working, looking for work. Only one person at work knows about it. We're going to spend some time talking about disclosure at work. That's a topic we spend a lot of time on in Cancer and Careers. Yep. Chemo. Okay, all right. Looking for work. Oops, somebody just currently working full-time from home. Me too. Me too. Again, had no idea it was going to go on for this long, but here we are. So,
yes, there was.
As he was saying, my name is Rachel Becker. I am Senior Director of Programs at Cancer and Careers. I've been with the organization for almost 7 years now, which is kind of amazing. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we were founded in 2001. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, which we are very, very excited about. And we are the only, Cancer and Careers is the only program of its kind that is solely dedicated to empowering and educating people with cancer to thrive in their working environments. We do so via our comprehensive website. We have free publications available in both English and Spanish, as well as career coaching. We have a Spanish language website as well. And additionally, we offer educational seminars that are targeted at employees who have received a diagnosis, as well as their colleagues, their healthcare providers, and certainly employers and caregivers, and anyone who is feeling their lives touched by cancer can benefit from this information as well. We are currently also in, we've been in the process, I say we're in the process, but you know, it's been a year now that we've been in the process of developing resources in an ongoing way that address the employment challenges that are happening during the coronavirus pandemic. And you can stay informed of these programs as they will roll out by signing up for our newsletter. I'm going to put a link of the at the deck so that you can sign up and stay abreast of all of the news and all of the great things that we're doing. And I promise we are very good about making sure that we don't send too many emails and clog up your inbox. And probably also worth mentioning before I move on that all of the resources that we provide are available free of charge. Okay. So as we saw in the chat, people who on this call are in different places in terms of their cancer experience and work journey, right? We have some who are in treatment, some who are likely post-treatment, I'm guessing, someone has just been diagnosed and is really starting to think about how work and cancer and life is going to come together for them. And on the other hand, I would also imagine that there are some of you on this call who have made choices and decisions about work and cancer and are experts on this topic in your own right. But so wherever you are in the process, I hope that you're going to walk away from today with some useful information that you can take with you. I will point out that the slides here are organized in a sort of story arc that, for lack of a better way to describe it, has a kind of beginning where we talk about being newly diagnosed, and then middle where we talk about working through treatment, and then we talk about at the end looking for work. And this is not done because I or anyone at Cancer and Careers thinks that a clean arc or that anything in life really works in a clean arc. We are all well aware, and I'm sure you are well aware as well, that life is considerably more nuanced and complicated than that. And so what I will say to you is that this arc was put in place just to really give it shape, to kind of be the skeleton that we hang all these details on. But don't necessarily read too much into the placement. There are topics that we will discuss under the newly diagnosed umbrella that might be relevant to somebody who has taken time off from work and is looking at returning to work now. Information can be relevant in a number of places. So I encourage you to have an open mind as we move through this talk and in terms of thinking about things that way. What I want to start with, of course, though, is this idea that I would imagine many of you can relate to, which is that moment that happens after you receive a diagnosis for the first time, when a lot of questions start coming up about, how is everything going to be handled? What is it going to look like? What needs to happen in order to make sure that life continues to happen in a way that addresses the needs that we all have in our life, right? And work, of course, is an important need for many people. And when it comes to thinking about work and cancer, there is often this central question that comes up at the beginning of the process, which very specifically is, am I going to or am I not going to work during all or part of my treatment? And it can feel very overwhelming to be at this point, to kind of have all these questions floating around and not being entirely sure how how to find answers to these questions, how to carve a path forward through this, all of the unknowns. And what we recommend when it comes to work is asking oneself two specific questions. First, how important is work to you personally? And then the second is, what information do you need in front of you in order to make a good decision about work? And then, of course, from there, other questions is, how is treatment going to affect work and schedule? Might you need time off for surgery or to manage side effects after vision? Is your health that you're likely to have periods of fatigue along the way and then moments where you might feel more productive? So how might you think about managing time in that way? And then there's also the question of what actually goes into working for you. I was just talking about the fact that I'm working from home right now, but many people have continued to work throughout the pandemic in a physical place of business. And of course, with the world starting to open up now and vaccines being distributed, that return to a physical space is starting to happen a little bit more. So does that mean that there's a commute that one might want to be thinking about? How much time does that take? We often think of ourselves as working 9 to 5 jobs, but if somebody has a 90-minute commute, that 9 to 5 job is actually to 6:30 p.m. So that's an 11-hour, 10-hour day, right? Long. It's long. And as you think about the way that treatment tends to play out, and you'll see I have this little pie chart on the bottom of the screen there. That's because we'll have this internal pool of resources, right? And it's our energy, it's our stamina. And as treatment progresses, that pool of resources tends to shrink and shrink and shrink, but we still need to cut the same number of slices out of it. So how does that get managed? How does it get shifted? Do some of them get bigger? Do some of them get smaller? These are the important things to be thinking about. Assessing how important a work environment is a big piece of figuring out how the work and cancer journey may come together. Clearly, all of us have spent this past year learning a lot about whether or not we are able to work remotely for our jobs, what that feels like, what that looks like. It is a great potential solution if you want to be able to have the flexibility to lie down. Certainly for somebody who's immunocompromised, this is probably a moment in time where being home and not out in the world is something that could be very appealing, and that will be the case. That was true before all of this started, and it will continue to be true once the world kind of stabilizes a little bit again in terms of this crisis, this global health crisis we're all facing. So finding out about that flexibility, we're going to talk more about that shortly. And then, of course, for many people, financial and insurance needs are the key decision driver. Going to continue working, not to continue working, and clearly the health insurance is a very important piece of the puzzle. And if that's, if you're the person who's carrying the health insurance for yourself or your family, that might be a reason to stay on the job and the only reason that one really wants to. But with all of that said, I think it's really important to flag that this isn't the case for everyone, or it may not be number one on the list of important factors when thinking about why we might want to continue in the workplace during treatment. And that's because for a lot of us, our work is who we are, right? It's really connected to our identity. And if you think about the initial conversations that we tend to have with people, particularly in this country, when we're meeting someone for the first time, what's the question that we always ask? Right? What's the first question people ask? They say, what do you do? And that's a pretty profound question when you think about it. And, being in a place where that answer might change, right? Where our ability to work is different, where perhaps there's some concern about whether we're going to be able to meet our goals that we've set for ourselves professionally. That can be emotionally heavy. So thinking about what that reality is for you, how is that going to happen? Because it's part of what makes you you and part of what's going to help you cope while all of this is going on. That very often from survivors. And the other thing that I think it's important to flag is that it's really important to talk to your healthcare team about what those preferences are in terms of working, because although it's gotten a lot better over the past, we've been in existence as an organization, there is still in certain circumstances this sort of idea that's floating around in healthcare communities amongst providers that that people who are going through cancer treatment don't want to work. And that's not the case for everyone. And if that's not the case for you, if there are reasons why you want to stay on the job, it's important to you, let them know, bring that up in the conversation so that it can be, it can be actively discussed between all of you as you're making plans. And again, that goes for thinking about returning to the workforce as well. We do trainings for healthcare professionals also, and we encourage them to bring up this topic when we do those trainings, but it doesn't always happen perfectly. And so unfortunately, sometimes it is the responsibility of the patient to bring these things up if it's what we want to talk about. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have a lot of experience in self-advocating at this point. And this is one point where making sure that your preference gets heard can be really important. Now, I just mentioned that it may be a good idea to gather some information, perhaps to have physically in front of you so that you can make some choices. And this slide breaks down into 3 buckets, the types of information that you might need. Obviously, we just spent a little bit of time talking about medical and treatment information on the last slide, or slide before that, so I'm not going to go into too much of that here. When we talk about work information, workplace information, we're talking about things like understanding what your leave policies might be, what your insurance policies are, Again, if there are any pre-existing flexibility options for things like working remotely or shifting hours. And then it's also often critical to do some legal fact finding in advance and get a little bit more information on which state and federal protections you might be entitled to at work. And I want to be very clear that we say this not because we think that a situation is likely to become litigious in a workplace. Rather, there are laws, I should say, that exist as tools. And very often, the protections that are provided by these laws to the people who are eligible for them, because not everyone is, we're going to talk about that in a second, but those protections serve as the key instruments that allow people to start to carve that path forward for themselves that's going to be best for them on their own personal work and cancer journey. So getting that information about state laws, about federal laws that you could qualify for, that could work in your favor, can really help you plan, right? The practical and the legal don't exist in vacuums. And so very often where there's a practical concern, there is a law that can help address it. So let's talk a little bit more about that right now. As we do, I do want to emphasize I'm not an attorney. So as Sue said, I am a social worker. And we are, so I'm not going to go into too much detail today about the law, but I will say that for the purposes of our conversation, there is one law I would like to flag, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this is a federal law, but again, not everybody qualifies for it. In order to access protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act, work for an employer that is big enough that the ADA is applicable to them. So specifically, they need to have 15 people working for the organization. You personally must also have the required skills, experience, degree, training, license, etc. to do the job. Basically, that means you're qualified to do the job that you have. Most of us already are qualified to do the jobs that we have. That's why we were hired to do them. And then the third is that the symptoms that you are experiencing must meet the criteria of being a disability as described under the ADA. And if one does meet all of these qualifications, the benefits that one is entitled to may include protection from discrimination in the workplace and also access to reasonable accommodations. And we're going to talk about both of those things a little bit more as we continue through. So I very quickly want to take some time to step outside of the workplace and discuss the online space. And you know, at Cancer and Careers, we often hear from patients and survivors who tell us about the very beautiful role that the internet is playing in their cancer journey. It helps them to stay connected with friends and family. We often hear from people who live in remote communities and have who, you know, weren't able to find anyone at their healthcare center who also had their diagnosis, but through the magic of the internet, were able to connect with someone else who's going through a similar thing to them. And so there's really that sense of community that can happen online. But with all of that said, it is important to flag that the employers these days, both prospective employers and current employers, do tend to Google candidates and current employees respectively.
Busy.
The reason that they do that is it's not necessarily malicious. It is typically done in the case of hiring because somebody has made a good impression and they want to, hiring manager wants to find out more about who that person is. In the case of current employees, it's often because a manager has come in to take over and they are excited to learn more about the people who they are supervising, but it can often lead to the discovery of information that perhaps you might in your workplace. So it is something to think about. I love that Sue flagged earlier, you know, turn off your camera, change your name if you have concerns about anonymity, because I think it's really important. And this isn't to say don't post online, never, you know, I'm not saying that at all, but it is a good idea to think through what it is that you're sharing. Take a look at privacy policies on websites where you may be posting to understand what those mean. Can you make your profiles private? Maybe it's about, making connections and posting up information and updates to friends and family on a site like My Lifeline or Caring Bridge, which are designed specifically for people who are going through a medical experience and so have a higher level of privacy protections in place, because we want you to be in control of your story and your narrative and the way that it gets perceived. And so it's really about being intentional with these choices in order to allow that to happen. We recommend developing a disclosure plan when you are thinking about sharing the news, whether it's with people in your circle or in the workplace. If you are going to share in the workplace, we heard from someone earlier who was saying only one person in her workplace knows, which is a great example of the fact that not everybody makes it broadly public that they're going through, a health experience on their job. So think about what you want to share. Think about where you would want it to be shared. Make decisions, right? Maybe some things go on My Lifeline, but they don't go on Twitter or Facebook. And then communicate those out to the people you share the information with so that they respect your choices, that they don't accidentally post something about your cancer experience on their Facebook profile and out you in that way by tagging you. That's a story we hear about frequently. And then, of course, there are the ways to intentionally build a professional online profile. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into this right now, but it's a great way if you are looking for work and have concerns that a hiring manager might Google you and might come across some cancer information, or if you just want to have a professional presence because the hiring managers are likely to Google you, because we know that they are. Building your own professional online brand can be a great idea. We actually have a full hour-long webinar on this process that is archived on our website. So if you're interested in more about that, I recommend going and taking a look. So moving back into the workplace, I do want to put a couple of data points in front of you right now. There's not a lot of data in this deck on purpose, but this I think is really interesting. This is from a survey that we did in 2019, where we talked to people who had received a cancer diagnosis, and we asked them about the reasons why they were continuing to work after their diagnosis. And what you see on this slide are the top 5 reasons that people gave us. They had a long list of choices. They were able to pick as many of them as they wanted to. And what I think is particularly fascinating is that none of the top 5 items are that financial or insurance piece of the puzzle. It was an option. People could pick it, but they didn't make it to the top 5. So it really speaks to this idea that work gives us meaning, right? It helps. It's a part of our identity and who we are. And then we also found that 75% of patients and survivors that we surveyed felt that working during treatment helped them to cope. 4% said work aids were aided in their treatment and recovery. So some really, really powerful data points around the importance of work in people's lives. Now, this is a question that we get asked a lot at Cancer and Careers. The question of, do I have to share the news of my diagnosis in the workplace? And what I will say about disclosure, whether it's in the workplace, whether it is in your personal life, is that it is a personal decision, and it is one that requires a lot of thought. And it is also typically not an all or nothing scenario. Just so we're on the same page, you are not, in most cases, because I don't want to say absolute here, but in most cases, you are not required to provide any information about your health history to your employer, either a current employer or a prospective employer, nor can they ask. There are exceptions to this. Of course, there can be situations where you need to share some information about what's going on with you in order to access protections under the law, such as the ones that we were ADA, the protection from discrimination, or the access to reasonable accommodations. But that doesn't necessarily mean sharing every last detail about your diagnosis or your prognosis. You may have to provide some support about what you're eligible to ask for and why you're asking for it. For example, it would be difficult to credibly file a complaint against your employer for discrimination if your employer doesn't know that there's something there to discriminate against. So as you're thinking about whether or not to share, it's important to consider all of those angles, because the reality is that we can always share more later, but once information is out there, it's kind of like getting toothpaste back in the tube to dial it back. So, so just important to put some thought into it and making the choices that feel great for you. When thinking through how to make a disclosure at work, there are a couple of things to consider overall. The first, of course, is treatment going to interfere with your ability to perform your job duties, or the legal benefits to telling, such as reasonable accommodations? But then also thinking about the company culture can make a difference as well, right? So we just talked about the fact that an employer can't discriminate if they don't know that there's something to discriminate against, right? But if you are in, and I hope none of you are, and I hope none of you ever are in a situation where you know that your employer is prone to not necessarily behaving in the best ways towards the people who work for them, you may want to share the information about what's going on, and in order to have the protection in place so that you can, if something happens, you have disclosed, and they're not able to discriminate against you for those reasons. Also thinking about how people have been treated in similar situations, so maybe it's not the case that you know anyone else who's had cancer, who's had a serious medical condition, or I should say a serious medical illness, but maybe there is somebody at your organization who has gone out on maternity, right? Who got pregnant, and think about what their experience was like. Did everybody on the team kind of jump in and pitch in and excitedly help out during the time that they were away? Or was there grumbling behind their back about having to take on those extra responsibilities? So that can inform the way in which you share the message. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you want to think about what's going to work for you personally. Some people are sharers. Some people are just going to feel very inorganic if they are going to their workplace every day and they are not talking to the people that they work with about what's going on with them. On the other hand, there are people who are not sharers, who really just want to talk about work at work and don't want to talk about their personal lives. And then there are people who very specifically feel that medical information is medical information, and that is not for everyone. That is for them. And all of those perspectives are valid. So knowing where spectrum, maybe you fall somewhere else on that spectrum, but honoring those feelings and knowing that there's no right way to do it. The only right way to do it, I should say, actually, is the way that feels right for you. This slide has some suggested ways to think about starting the conversation with your employer. I will send Sue a PDF of this deck after presentation so that you can have the slides if you're interested in having them, and look back at these later. But I will also flag that we have created a manager's kit that is designed to carry into your manager's office and kind of help drive these conversations. That has a lot of critical information for managers to know when they're supervising someone who's going through treatment. But I will say that our branding is all over it, and it does say cancer. So if you have not decided to disclose the full picture of what's going on, you may not want to bring in this document. Also, an important flag that even if you have chosen not to use your words to disclose your cancer diagnosis, side effects can sometimes disclose things for us. And that, of course, includes physical changes. If you might start losing your hair, if you start losing a great deal of weight, these are the things that these can invite questions from coworkers. Often they're well-intentioned questions. People are concerned. They want to do something to help and show compassion. But if you haven't disclosed and you're concerned that you may start getting these kinds of questions, it's a good idea to have prepared answers for any questions that someone might ask that keep you in the zone of being comfortable, so that you don't accidentally share information that you'd prefer that it stayed more private. Also important to flag that non-physical non-visible side effects can also lead to questions. If you seem very tired frequently, if there's a notable change in your typically outgoing and bubbly personality, that might cause people to ask you what's going on. So it's really about thinking through and being prepared for responses. The side effect that we get asked about most frequently at Cancer in Careers is chemo brain. And what I will tell you about managing chemo brain at work is that there is no magic bullet solution. It is really about going back to basics. Let go of the idea of multitasking. It turns out that the human brain, there have been studies done on this, like most of us are just not naturally good at multitasking. We think we are because we live in this society where we have all these bells and whistles and different windows open on our computers and things like that. But the reality is that the human brain is really only designed to focus on one thing at a time. So letting go of the idea of multitasking and really simplifying so you can focus can go a long way. Having written lists of priorities. Scheduling time to focus on projects where you know that you're not going to be looking at emails for the next hour, you're not going to be responding to instant messages for the next hour, so you can really dig in undistracted in maintaining your banning clutter from your workstation. Believe it or not, clutter can be distracting and it can cause issues with focus. And then, of course, stress is something that that can kind of get you worked up, and it can cause the way that your brain is working to kind of shift. We can all kind of relate to the idea that when we're tense or we're nervous or we're anxious, sometimes it's a little bit harder to focus. So working stress management techniques into your day. And of course, I know that you all get beautiful products and aromatherapy things from Unite for Her. So you all have those on hand, and this is your moment. This is your moment to keep those near you and work those stress relieving techniques into your work day in order to help maintain your focus. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm not going to speak to this slide because we want to stick to time. But what I will say is that if you're interested in learning more about communications in the workplace, we do have a full hour-long webinar archived on our website where we go into some of the nuances and ins and outs of communicating effectively. I gave that webinar, so it's an opportunity to spend another hour with me. I recommend going and checking out that recording. So when we think about reasonable accommodations, these are your job, your schedule in which you work that makes it possible to perform your essential job duties. And of course, this is one of the protections that's available to Americans with Disabilities Act. And so rather than use a lot of just explaining to try to get across what those look like, what reasonable accommodations might look like, I'm going to walk you through a couple examples. So this first example is of a woman who we worked with a number of years ago. She loved her job. It was very important for her to continue working, but she started to notice as her treatment progressed that she was feeling very strongly nauseated while she was in the workplace. She did not feel the same level of nausea at home. She did not feel the same level of nausea at the workplace. And so what we found was that her office was right next to the cafeteria. And so it was the smell of the cooking food wafting in that was increasing her levels of nausea during the day when she was working. And for her, the reasonable accommodation was to switch offices with somebody so that she would be further away from the cafeteria. So that is an example of modifying workspace. And again, it's not going to work for everybody. That was a very specific solution for her, very specific circumstances. And that's what it's about. It's about looking at your job and the concerns that you're having and kind of being creative and flexible, but also practical about what might be done in order to accommodate. Frank is someone who worked at a large organization. His job involved printing a lot of papers, but unfortunately the printer that his computer was attached to was on a different floor of the building. And so every time he printed documents, he needed to walk up and down 2 flights of stairs. And when fatigue set in, that became much more complicated. So the reasonable accommodation for him was to get a printer that could sit at his workstation. And that helped to mitigate some of the fatigue that he was feeling. So again, a very solution worked for him and made a huge difference in addressing that particular side effect. Here is a that one might ask themselves about having, patients, thinking about whether you could work a full-time or flexible schedule, if there's a policy in place that an exception could be made to asking for special furniture. I have this crazy mouse because I have carpal tunnel. So, that could be an example of a reasonable accommodation. Anyhow, again, we will make sure that these slides get to you so you can refer back to these questions. And then you can also always reach out to us at Cancer and Careers if you are interested in talking through it with one of our staff to try to figure out what might work for you. So for someone who's taken time off from their job and is going to be returning to an existing job, there can be some challenges. There are pros and cons in this circumstance. Probably the biggest pro is that it's a familiar landscape, but a con that we often hear about is that people have of what it was like to do their job before treatment, when their energy level used to be, and ability to focus was a little bit different. And the list of course goes on. What we like to encourage people who are returning to an existing job after time away is to take it step by step. Ease back into the routine. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to hit the ground running. You will get stamina back. You will recalibrate to the whole experience, but be gentle with yourself. Now, another thing that we commonly hear is about those well-intended coworkers who show up very frequently and have questions, ask questions about, what's going on with your cancer? How are you feeling? How are things going? This comment we have at the top, right? My uncle had cancer. Very often you become the repository for everybody's cancer stories, and that can be kind of off-putting, particularly if you are going back to your job after some time away and really don't want to think about cancer anymore. You want work to be the not cancer part of your life. And so what we recommend in these circumstances is a technique that we call SWIVEL. It involves addressing the comment that was made and then putting the word "and" in there and then swiveling the conversation back around to something you feel more comfortable talking about. So with this, my uncle had cancer statement, I'm sorry to hear that. It must have been hard. And while I have you standing here, I'd love to pick your brain about the meeting that we had yesterday. I have some thoughts and I'd like to see what you think of them as well, right? So that really puts people in the position of they tend to pick up a conversation from where you leave it off. It's a great little verbal trick. Practice it with your friends and family. Social workers are great people to rehearse swiveling with. And I offer this to you as a tool. On these next couple of slides, we also have some examples of comments that people might make, questions that they might ask that can also be addressed using or various other kind of pre-planned responses to questions. We talked about this earlier. Side effects questions might come up, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I encourage you to read these in your own time. We also go into detail on this in the Communicating Effectively webinar. So that's a great place to go for more information on this. So job search, which many of you are involved in or thinking about, changing careers. We hear about that frequently. What I will say is that let's see. Okay, so again, we have on this slide some data points that came from a study we did in 2019, that same study I was talking about earlier. And we talked to people who were looking for work, and we asked them questions about disclosing during a job search, which is something that comes up frequently. We get asked a lot of questions about that. And what we found was that 49% of the people we surveyed felt that their prospective employers would treat them differently if they disclosed their cancer diagnosis. 31% felt their diagnosis had limited their job prospects and their ability to get hired. And then 50% expressed at least some concern about getting hired if a potential employer found out about their diagnosis. So if that any of you feel concerned about any one of those things, you are not alone. It is at all within the cancer community. And then if you look at the bottom of the slide here, these two data points come from some external studies that were done independently. It was academic research that was done. But in one study with fake cover letters, researchers found that employers expressed 26% less interest in candidates who disclosed a disability than candidates who did not. And applicants who disclosed a cancer history received fewer callbacks from managers, 21% fewer than applicants who did not disclose their cancer history. So we know that, that some of these fears that people were expressing to us in the survey that we did, they actually do have foundation. And while we very much wish that it weren't the case that people were discriminated against in their job search, we do know that it does happen. And of course, there are many challenges and unknowns when it comes to looking for work. It can feel very scary. And we're going through a really challenging time right now, regardless of anything that is going on in our direct lives, because we are still waiting out this pandemic. And so it's important to think about the emotional highs and lows that you might encounter during a job search, and know that being strategic about the approaches that you're taking in finding work, and also understanding that job searching is and it's something that at and build upon, that can really be helpful in terms of understanding how you can feel a little bit more during this process, which can sometimes make people feel a little bit out of control. And then again, I want to emphasize what I said earlier, which is that in a job search process, you are required to share any information about your medical history. And when looking for work, really about it's relationship building, and the process is similar to any relationship that we might be building, where we, it can be beneficial to kind of be, think about the way that you reveal information. On a first date, we don't necessarily share the kind of details with the person sitting across the table from us that we would when we're 6 months into a relationship, or when we're 6 years in and maybe wedding rings have been exchanged, right? So, so really thinking about where in the process to share. There are also certain things that you should consider if you're job searching right now. So besides practical questions like what companies are hiring and what jobs are available, you'll also want to try to find out the safety measures and policies that employers are implementing and how important those are to you personally, and take that all into consideration when you're making choices. This is all likely going to be unique to your specific situation. Again, it's about knowing where your comfort levels are for you, and whatever your comfort levels are for you are right. They are yours. You are entitled to them. And of course, talking with healthcare providers about things that you specifically should be thinking about is a very good idea if you are looking for work and thinking about changing settings during this moment in time. And when it comes to finding opportunities, we know that about 85% of jobs are found through networking. So if you have been sending out a lot of resumes via Monster.com, who say that they're sending out, 50, 100 resumes a week, and you're not hearing anything back, it is very possible to networking to find opportunities will bring you different results. And I would encourage you not to think about a network in too limited a way, right? A network is not simply the people that you've worked with in the past or people that you went to school with. Your network is really anyone. The people who are on this call with us right now could potentially be someone that you strike up a conversation with, and they're able to help you find your next opportunity. Networking on LinkedIn is a wonderful approach. We're going to talk a little bit more about LinkedIn in a little bit. Friends, neighbors, members of a church that you belong to, or another religious community that you belong to. Really, again, it's about knowing how to have the conversations, putting out there that you're looking for work, being able to just succinctly describe what it is that you do. And we actually have a webinar on networking that is coming up in the near future. So I have that listed at the end of the deck, and I encourage you to check that out. It'll be led by one of our career coaches who is amazing. And it's a nice deep dive into what successful networking looks like. Having resumes and cover letters that work are really important. Resumes in particular, you know, I don't know if you know this, but there are trends and styles that go in and out when it comes to resumes. And so you want to make sure that yours looks current and up to date and fits with those current trends, that it's designed in a way that's going to catch the attention of scanning softwares, of ATS softwares, because as you may or may not know, most resumes are scanned by a computer these days before they land in front of a human. And at Cancer and Careers, we do have a resume review service, a free resume review service. You can upload your resume. We'll pass it along to a career coach who will take a look at it and give you some nice tailored feedback. And you know, take advantage. It's really great. And she's been working with us for 15 years. She's an amazing person. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We also have a job search toolkit, which is one of the publications that we offer that can be ordered or downloaded in PDF form, all free. And it's got a lot of great examples of cover letters, what makes an effective cover letter. And then of course, I've got some pointers on this slide with tips, but if you're really serious about, you know, getting your resumes and your cover letters in the best shape possible, download our job search toolkit. I recommend it to people all the time. I think it's one of the most valuable tools that we have available for people who are looking for work. We talked a little bit earlier about disclosing during a job search, and you know, these are the questions that we get asked. Should I share on my resume? Should I share? You know, often people are wondering if that's a way to kind of offset a gap in their resume if they haven't been working for a period of time, that they maybe explain like, oh, I was sick and that's why it was going on. If they don't have it on their resume, should they explain it in their cover letter to contextualize a gap? Or what if they get asked about a gap during an interview, or they get asked about something else, right? Oftentimes people in the cancer community will also do volunteer work within the cancer community after they've had their diagnosis. And so they put that on their resume, and that can sometimes invite questions. And what I will say is this, is that it is entirely up to you how you want to control your narrative, whether you want to disclose, if you want to disclose, what you want to share. That is all your. As we saw, do know that hiring managers do sometimes, you know, discriminate, and it's hard within a hiring process to prove why you didn't get called in for a job. But given how short resumes are, short cover letters are supposed to be, it is best to use those documents to, you know, explain why you're a great candidate for the job and explain what you bring to the table and really kind of push that piece of the conversation forward. If you really want to share with the potential that you have a history that's very important to you, which we also hear, some people feel like they're lying if they leave it out. What we recommend is in-person interview. Because the difference between reading about someone on or sitting across a computer, I should say, because so many interviews are happening digitally these days, given what's going on. Someone's energy that way. You get a sense of who they are and what it's going to be like to go back and forth and interact on a day-to-day basis. And that is something that employers are looking for too. And that news is going to land differently once you share it in the way that we're interacting right now. You know, so that you've provided the hiring manager with the fullest picture of who you are as a human being. Often that information will land differently than it would on a piece of paper that's one in a pile of papers that a hiring manager has on their desk. And, you know, it's much easier to take a piece of paper and do that with it than it is to write off somebody who you've spent time talking with. So I offer you that, but again, no requirement to share. You're not lying if you leave it out. People leave out all kinds of information when they're interviewing for jobs about who they are. So we can talk about that more in the Q&A if you have questions. During an interview, swiveling is also a great technique if you do get asked about a gap on a resume, as is demonstrated here, or any other issue regarding your health or your past that you don't want to address. It is absolutely fair game to respond in broad strokes and not use the word cancer. This first example says, I was dealing with a family issue and that's resolved now. And I am thrilled to discuss how my management skills can help build the team and grow your business, right? So this person has acknowledged the comment and then very quickly moved to a place where they're talking about what they bring to the table and what they're interested in and why they're a great candidate for the job. And that really is the primary concern of anyone who's doing interviewing. They want the person that's across the table from them to prove that they're going to be a great hire so that they can stop interviewing and get back to the other things that they do as part of their job. So always be driving towards that. Always be driving towards what you bring to the table, why you're interested in the job. Don't be afraid to swivel away from questions about your health. We also recommend researching a potential employer before you start working for them. Well, you know, this is one of the great things that the internet brings to the table, is that we can find out about the organizations that we're considering entering into a long-term relationship with. Just as the employers are Googling the candidates, we should be Googling potential employers as well. And, you know, obviously learning about things like what benefits they might be offered is something that's very important to somebody who's gone through a cancer experience. But it's not necessarily a great question to ask before you have an offer on the table, because the person doing the hiring to think that, you know, you're not really interested in the job, you're just interested in the job. So see if anyone is talking about it on the internet. Did you network your way to the job interview, and was it through a person who currently works or used to work at the organization and can answer that question for you? You know, if you are concerned about discrimination or think you might need access to reasonable accommodations, how big is the company? Is the ADA protections going to potentially apply because they meet that size requirement? Is there a history of discrimination lawsuits? That's information that's available online and can be good to take into consideration. So it's really about kind of doing the background check in the same way that, obviously, you know, it's a good idea to prepare for an interview by researching the company so you can talk about why you'd be a great fit, but it's also great to do this research so that you can know if this is a thing you want to commit to, thing you want to be part of long term. And then, of course, the goal of any job search is to be hired, right? And start working with a new employer. But of course, there are pros and cons to this as well. One of the really big pros is that it's a blank slate. It's a chance to start over again. If you do not want anyone at the organization to know anything about your health history and you're coming from a place where they know everything about your health history, your foot is on the gas in terms of what you share and when and how. There's also no before picture that you're working against because you're learning new and you're learning fresh, right? With that said, to learn a new job, it often takes a lot of energy to learn a new job. And it's often said that it can take up to 6 months before you really understand, you know, how to do your job really well. There's also some energy that needs to go into understanding of the place that you work and the pre-existing relationships that are there. How are you going to fit into those? How are you going to navigate the politics, right? What are the quirky downsides of the place where you work? Because every organization has its weird, right? It's the thing that every family is dysfunctional in their own way. Well, every work site is dysfunctional in its own way as well. And so understanding how that's all going to come together, that requires an extra dose of energy. But what I will say to you is this: companies do not hire people with the intention of watching them fail. They do not want their employees to be unhappy. They want them to be happy and productive and successful there. If you receive a job offer, it is because they've done their homework and they feel that you are the best candidate for the job. So if you feel like you need help, ask for it. So often people are willing to provide it. More time with trainings, asking questions, right? And then also keeping in mind that coming out of the gate and putting in 80 hours a week so that everybody knows that you're serious and you mean business, that's not the only good way to make. That's not the only way to make a good impression at your workplace. And in fact, I would argue it is a very complicated thing to do when you first started a new organization, because it is very difficult to sustain over time. And so if you set that expectation from the beginning that you're going to do, put in way more hours than anybody else and is required, that can be a tough thing to keep going for months and potentially even years. And of course, if you are starting this, you are still experiencing some side effects, whether you're in treatment or in recovery, it's having that expectation for yourself may not be realistic. Rather, getting to know the people in your work environment, asking for feedback on how you're doing, and then integrating any constructive criticism that comes along. Really, making sure that you're meeting deadlines and making sure that you're taking notes and being conscientious and being gentle with yourself, right? Giving yourself grace during the process of learning what a new experience it is, because you were hired to succeed. So know that, own that, and figure out how to make it work for you. That brings me to the end of my content slides. I have a couple of, we have a couple of our events listed. You can see the networking webinar that I was talking about, also building an effective LinkedIn profile and resumes 101 coming up for you job seekers. The National Conference on Working Cancer is happening Friday, June 25th. It is virtual. Please come join us. A few of our other resources that I mentioned, resume review service, video. And I've also included some financial resources here that have been put into place during this complicated time that we are all living through. And so many of us are feeling that impact. So if these are helpful for you, I offer them to you. What they might be helpful for, please share it. We will be through Cancer and Careers later this year. So again, another reason to sign up for our newsletter. There are some more resources that you can go to with information on employment rights and legal assistance. And then that is my contact information. You can always feel free to send me an email and keep the conversation going. Any questions that come up after today. But of course, I think maybe we still have a few minutes to answer some questions, and I am very, very happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Wow, wow, wow. I am sitting here just going, what a wealth of resources we have at our fingertips with you and Careers and Careers. That was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. It's my absolute pleasure. We love what we do. It's such a complicated issue. Sigmund Freud, who I'm not prone to quoting for many things, because he's kind of a complicated person. One thing that he said that I love is that the purpose of work is the purpose of life is to love and to work.
Yeah.
To give us meaning. And I think it's really, really important to take control where we can, so we can all.
Yeah. Well, it was a beautiful presentation, and just even in the chat, we all agree you totally love what you do, because it came out in your presentation. It was fantastic. So many good resources. I know for me, just sitting here, I'm actually jotting down some notes, and I was curious, do you do, and please use the chat, to ask questions. Do you do one-on-one? So do you do any counseling one-on-one with people if they want?
Yeah, so we have, yes, you can get the slides, Jenny. I will make sure that Sue has the PDF the slides to share with you guys.
And ladies, I'll just chime in there real quick. I put it in the chat. We have her library now. So it's uniteforher.org/her-library. And we can actually make a nice little Cancers and Careers drop down there and build that so that we can link right to all of these fabulous resources. But this will be under the speaker series, and we'll have the deck there.
Yes.
But yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
So you were asking if we do one-on-one. So we do.
Yeah.
We have a phone number today. It's not here. So if you email, oh, sorry about that. I just ended the slideshow and I was trying to put up the final slide again so you can see it again. Share screen. There we go. If you send me an email, or you can email our general inbox, which is cancerandcareers@cew.org. I will actually put that into the chat so you have it. We can send you the phone number. We can schedule a time to talk. I am a social worker. We have another social worker on staff. All of our staff is trained to talk through these issues and provide guidance. So please reach out. We are very happy to be actual humans on the other side who are helping you human to human.
Yeah, and free services, which is just so valuable. There's so much great information here that, you know, I know our women could take advantage of, you know, even when you're happily working, you know, I love that slide and statistics that just talked about why everybody went back to work. And I just thought that was so telling, you know, because we keep thinking of other things that are front of mind, insurance or financial, but it really does give us purpose. It gives us value. It keeps our mind off of our disease.
We hear all the time people saying, you know, work was the one place where I really was able to forget about cancer, because I just got absorbed in what I was doing, and it was an opportunity to socialize. And, you know, it's so true.
Yeah, there was another thing that really stuck with me too, Rachel, and I don't mean to take the floor, but it was just so good, so informative, and I know our community is going to love this. So we are definitely going to have you back. We offer a lot of alumni sessions, you know, with our community, but it was the how and when, you know, that you control the conversation. You can never bring it back. That whole toothpaste analogy, like it really is one of those things that, I get it, you know, and once it's out there, you can never bring it back. And I do remember, you know, when I was diagnosed, I mean, I'm going on 17 years, right? And I just became my diagnosis. So when everyone saw me, their how are you was such a how is your cancer? Like that is constantly what I received.
Yeah, it has the head tip, right?
Oh, how are I could never get beyond it. And that just sort of spoke to me, but I can't even imagine being in the workplace. And I love the swivel. So you just had so many good ideas. I love the idea of being able to have a one-on-one. Ladies, please take advantage of this resource. I just feel so honored that we were able to connect with you, and that, you know, we can continue to partner and explore how we can bring you to our community.
Well, as do we. I mean, community is so important, and I love that you keep using that word, and it's just so clear that that's what you have here. And you know, again, I can't emphasize enough for those of you who are thinking about looking for a new opportunity, or aren't right now but might be in the future. You know, it's our communities. If there's anything that we learned this year, is that we need each other. We need our community.
Totally.
And how fortunate and blessed you all are to be part of this community. Please consider yourself parts of our community too. And we are so thrilled to be a part of the Unite for Her community as well.
Yeah. I know we had to like rebuild our whole hands-on community, right? Like we were always in person, but it worked, Rachel, you know, like we built all these different platforms, opportunities to come together just to be able to take a break and, you know, get educated and get some more knowledge and empowerment. But I could feel your energy through the screen, as I'm sure you could feel ours. And we were delighted today to have you. So does anyone else have any questions that they want to put into the chat for Rachel? We're on narrative. Thank you. So such positive, you know, positive comments here. And thank you for all the positive.
It's a pleasure. Yeah. And of course, yeah, you own your narrative, your stories are amazing. Stories are beautiful. We all, you know, we love hearing good stories, and we love telling good stories, and you're the author of yours.
Yeah. So good.
You author your work story.
It's great.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Instead of put on the chat box. Yeah, here's my experience during my first post-treatment of my initial diagnosis. And you have to fill those questionnaire online. One question, they list the disability and include answer. And they have 3 choices, whether yes or no, or I don't want to disclose.
Oh.
I don't want to be too honest or dishonest. And I was debating whether I put there, I don't want to disclose. But at the same time, I think there's probably a trap for asking this question. If you don't have anything to hide, why did you refuse to disclose? So, but I cannot proceed this question.
Right.
I'm just asking how to
Yeah,
handle.
so we get asked this all the time. Specifically, the way that you described it is because there is the option, I prefer not to answer. I prefer not to answer this question if that is what you do, what your preference is, but then also saying that on every question, because then you didn't do something different on the disability. Want to contribute to the masking that's available for people, right? So I offer that to you. Again, I think the way that you thought about this is incredibly profound. I'm so glad you asked the question. And then, oh, it looks like there's another question in chat. Now you'd like to go back into the insurance business. Okay, so this person has said, I spent 6 years not working after being in insurance for 13 years. I let my license expire and started working at a preschool for 19 years. Now I'd like to go back into the insurance business. Is it too late? Did I take off too much time? So, you know, I don't think that there's, listen, I'm an optimist on all of these things. I think that if you want to make a shift back to a field that you're in, there's no such thing as I took too much time off. You know, you bring to the table changed, the insurance industry very likely changed in the time that you were away from it. So it may be worth time to take some courses. Clearly, if this is work that you need a license for, you probably need to get your license renewed. So taking those courses and renewing the license could be of benefit. And then this is another example of where networking can work in your favor. So beautiful thing about LinkedIn. And again, if you're understanding of LinkedIn, we have actually, we're going to be hosting a live webinar, building a LinkedIn profile this year. So check that out. But one of the beautiful things about LinkedIn is you can reach people in an industry who maybe you don't know, or perhaps you do know people within the insurance industry who are still there, and just ask them to meet you for a cup of coffee, maybe virtual coffee at this moment, but just sit down, ask if you can pick their brain and have a conversation with them about what might be involved in getting back into the industry. You may find that it's a lot easier than you thought. Forums on LinkedIn for people who kind of work that you're interested in doing. That's a great way to build relationships. We have a webinar on career change, an hour-long webinar on career change that was held earlier this year and is archived on our website. Again, I'm going to share my screen again really quickly so that I can go back a couple of slides. And whoop, that is not what I meant to do. I can go back a couple of slides and show you where the the upcoming virtual events are. Oh, actually, it's not letting me go back. I'm not sure why. This is our video archive where you can go and look at the past recordings. So the career change webinar is there. We also have a webinar there called Enhancing Your Skills Prepping for Success, which will also be done live later in the year if you want to actually ask questions of the woman who's presenting it. We have an Ask a Career Coach message board, which you see listed on this slide as well. So you could post that question to some of our career coaches and get someone else's advice and perspective on how to be thinking about this, as if it's something that you want to be doing again. And if you have any financial concerns about the cost of taking classes or getting your license reinstated or whatever that might be accepting applications for financial assistance grants. Later in the year, there are financial assistance programs listed that might help you pay for courses or cover things in that way. Really a ton of resources. Feel free to send me an email, and I am sticking with no. You have not taken too much time off. That is always an opportunity to go back. Anyone else? Did we lose Sue?
No, you didn't lose me. I am here. Do you see me? You know what
I see you now. No, well, I became the host. Zoom told me.
I did. I changed you over to the host because I'm having such trouble with my internet connection that I did not want this incredibly vibrant conversation to drop, and I would be in charge of dropping the whole entire call. So I put you over to the host. Yeah, just in case. I just wanted to make sure I had a backup. But no, I am here, and all so good. So ladies, we will have this up on our site. I am going to promote this to our social media as well, Rachel. So we'll make sure we get all of that on there. Again, it's uniteforher.org/herlibrary.